I'm going to start with the introduction. Yes, our fight is about affordability and abundance, but it is also about freedom of inquiry, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of spirit. Or as the founder of Providence, Rhode Island, Roger Williams, put it, soul liberty. The only way to truly understand American constitutional democracy, American democratic republicanism, is that the ultimate goal, the goal that shaped every other goal, was the fight to establish an absolute liberty of the soul, a liberty to wander intellectually and spiritually wherever we will. We can trace this to the Puritan Revolution in England, to the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, to the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And whether you believe in God or not, and no matter what God you believe in, no one can fully understand the purpose of America's liberty laws and principles without understanding soul liberty as the ultimate goal. Pope Leo, in his encyclical, wrote, "Freedom in the digital age is not merely a matter of interiority. It is also a public concern. It calls for clear rules, transparency, the possibility of recourse, and proportionate limits on the use of intrusive technologies, so that technology will remain at the service of the human person and not become a form of control over conscience." One of my great honors these last years has been to watch Senator Chris Murphy think and reason his way to a new vision of liberty. He has done so through tough, vitally important fights, as a leading voice in Congress calling out concentrations of power and wealth and control, including an incredibly important fight to restore that great liberty law, the Robinson-Patman Antitrust Act. He has done so now through a new book published just a few weeks ago, Crisis of the Common Good, The Fight for Meaning and Connection in a Broken America. In this, Senator Murphy moves swiftly beyond a focus on what we fight against to a vision of what we fight for. He understands that this, our fight, is not a revolution in policy, but an intellectual revolution, a spiritual revolution, a revolution in how we see the world and our place in it. And that the purpose of liberty is not to stand alone. It is to be free to make true community, to be free to serve others, not by compulsion, but by choice. Everybody, please welcome one of the true leaders of the new liberty movement, Senator Chris Murphy.
Well, Barry, thank you very much, and really grateful for the invitation. This journey that I have been on over the last several years to try to understand the roots of our discontent as a nation has been one with several Sherpas, Barry and other people in this room amongst them. And so I was just really tickled to get the invitation to speak today. And I looked at the lineup of others who are addressing you, and it's really, really good company. I wanted to take Barry's invitation and to try to take a step back. You are going to have these very vital conversations on how you turn the dials robustly and aggressively of our regulatory scheme in this country to make sure that we have decentralized corporate power, where we have the ability for small businesses to become big businesses, where we attack the abuse of workers and consumers, price gouging. But there is this inextricable link to the structure of our economy and the way that people are feeling today about how they interact with the economy and our democratic crisis. And so that's just what I wanted to say a few words to you about today. I'll start with a scene from 1961, and this is a Jerusalem courtroom. It's the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was essentially the organizer of all of the logistics of the Holocaust. And in that courtroom is a correspondent for The New Yorker named Hannah Arendt. And she is surprised at what she sees that day. because she is listening to Eichmann and she is expecting to hear a virulent, unhinged racist. This is the person who led to slaughter millions of Jews. And instead, she's listening to someone speak just plainly and coldly about logistics, about transport schedules, about train schedules, about following orders. And she is watching someone, she realizes, that has just surrendered all of their agency and all of their independent thinking, in this case to the Nazi regime. And she writes this article in which she calls what she sees the banality of evil. Later, she would write one of the most important books of the 20th century, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And while Eichmann isn't a central figure in that book, and you know this book, she describes in it the preconditions for the spread of authoritarianism. And the primary precondition that she identifies is something that she calls rootlessness. And Eichmann was someone who was rootless. He had no independent moral judgment. He had no community to which he belonged to. And so he surrendered himself to the Nazi regime and to the Nazi ideology. For her, rootlessness is this idea that as a human, you can find yourself in a way where you are rooted to no firm ground. You belong to no garden, to no field. You have no power, you have no agency, you just drift, right? Wherever the wind takes you, because you have no roots. You are helpless. You are powerless to forces that are beyond your control. And in this book that Barry talks about, I describe what I call, not originally, but a kind of spiritual unspooling that is happening in this country that has led us to the brink of totalitarianism. And the two kind of primary spiritual, when I say spiritual, I obviously don't mean religious, right? I mean metaphysical. These two spiritual maladies, the primary ones that I talk about in the book, are loneliness, an epidemic that we see all over the country today, and powerlessness. And these are, in fact, the very preconditions that Arendt names as the accomplices of totalitarians. And the argument I make, and it will be familiar to you, is that we have chosen to structure our economy and our culture to make people feel more lonely and more powerless. And it is really important for your discussion here today to include a diagnosis of the metaphysical state of this country, because all of our politics are driven by the way that people feel in an economy and in a culture. And today, people are feeling more powerless, more helpless, and more alone than ever before. And Arendt is telling you, and we feel this today, that when you don't belong anywhere, when you have no power, when you are just twisting in the wind, forces that move you are beyond your control, you will cling to any explanation for your state of being that is available to you. And that is what totalitarians offer, a simple theory of the case. In this case, an argument by Donald Trump and his accomplices that your rootlessness, your unhappiness, your loneliness is to be explained by others who are stealing from you connection or power. Immigrants, Muslims, gay children. And so our project here is to build an economy and a culture that reestablishes roots. And I'll maybe just talk about one chapter in my book. It's the second chapter, I think, called The Cult of Everywhere. And I won't find a better way to sort of explain what I'm trying to say in this chapter than by just reading a few sentences. We have slowly surrendered our local economies and our local identities to the cult of everywhere. a belief that efficiency and scale should trump rootedness and place, that it really doesn't matter where you live so long as you can order the same products, watch the same streaming shows, and follow the same influencers online. The cult of everywhere, made possible by the global integration of national economies, promises convenience and low prices, and it often delivers, but it steals something from us, a sense that our life is rooted in a special place, a place that gives us identity and connection and common purpose. Local identity, the idea that you belong to a place, the idea that there is a community that you are a part of that is unique, I think is an absolute precondition to the defense of democracy, one of many. But I decided to just drill down on this for a few minutes with you today and maybe give you an experience from my life in a very small way that explains why local identity, rootedness, a decentralized economy is so important to spiritual health. So I grew up in a small suburb of Hartford, Connecticut, Wethersfield. It's still a relatively healthy place, but it was much more healthy during the years that I was growing up there. I remember on the weekends, I would go grocery shopping with my grandmother, and we would go to a place called the Wethersfield Supermarket. The Wethersfield Supermarket was just an independent grocery store. It was owned by the McHugh family. We knew them, not well, but we knew them. And when we would walk in, we would generally go first to the deli counter. And we would be greeted by John, the deli attendant. John made a pretty good wage, and so he had made working at the deli counter a career. He could make it a career. It paid enough so that he could provide for his family. And John knew everybody that walked in. He knew my grandmother. And so we would often spend 5 or 10 minutes at the deli counter having a conversation with John. And I always remember John would hand me over the counter a free slice of Land O'Lakes American cheese. And I thought I was the most special guy in the world, that I was getting a free slice of cheese. And after 5 or 10 minutes of conversation, we would continue with our shopping. I remember that so vividly. I was very young when my grandmother died. I mean, I was probably 7 or 8 years old. So these are some of the most vivid memories from my childhood. Why? Because it gave me such a clear sense of connection to the place in which I lived. That the people who worked at this store cared about me. That John wasn't my grandmother's closest friend, but he was one of hundreds in that community that was her, what sociologists would call middle ring of friends. Not her closest friends, not strangers, but people with which she shared these regular, temporary but important connections. And the fact that we knew the McHugh family mattered too, because we felt safe going into that store. We knew we weren't going to get gouged. We knew we were going to get treated fairly because the McHughs, went to the same church we went to, right? They would see us. They would be held accountable. And this, to me, is why the decentralization of economic power is so important. Because when you create an economy where there is more power distributed in local places, two things happen. One, you are just more likely to find connection in that local economy. Retailers, stores that are locally rooted, are owned by people who are local, are just going to treat you better. You are going to find those small, important connections. Downtowns will be healthier, right? If more retail is decentralized rather than centralized. Downtowns are places where you find community, where you build community, where you run into people. But it also just gives you a greater sense of power. When the owner of your community's hospital, the owner of the supermarket, the dry cleaner, the owner of the company that you work for, don't live in your community. live everywhere, live in Davos and Aspen and the Upper East Side all at the same time, you feel power. It's part of what makes you feel powerless, because you feel no accountability structure, no ties to the people who are making the big decisions in your life. And so this is just one chapter in the book, but when you are talking about breaking up concentrated corporate power, yes, it's going to result in less price gouging and less abuse of consumers and lower prices, but it also is going to result in people feeling more connected as commerce is more local, and feeling more powerful as there is a shorter accountability line between the people who own the things that matter in your local economy and the people who are interacting with that economy. And so I just ask you, as you're thinking about this liberty agenda, when you're thinking about how to restructure our economy and our culture, to really think about this through the prism of how people are feeling today. They are feeling exhausted, they are feeling powerless, they are feeling lonely. And are you designing today systems that will make people feel more powerful, that will give them more access to connection? In the appendix, I think it's in the appendix to Origins of Totalitarianism, Arendt talks about the antidote to authoritarianism. And she says it is the chess club. And she doesn't really mean the chess club, but what she says is that when you feel like you are connected to something, like a chess club, right? A group of people that you play chess with twice a week, then you are less susceptible to find your primary roots and identity in politics, and in particular in divisive politics. And that is the other benefit of reclaiming local identity, rebuilding the health of local places and local economies and local cultures. Not having us all be forced to belong to some antiseptic global identity structure or global economy. When you feel like you are a member of a unique local place, then you are less likely to go find your identity in politics. The studies show that the people whose primary identity structure is a political identity structure tend to be much lonelier. And because politics is by nature an adversarial identity, it ends up being much less healthy than other identities, like a local identity, which has sometimes an adversarial nature, but is really unifying. You belong to a place, and that place includes people who practice different religions and often come from different ethnic backgrounds. It's a much more unifying identity. And so Arendt says the antidote is the chess club. If you have a thing that you belong to, and that belonging is not just through a prism of politics, you are likely to be resistant to these totalitarian messages. And so think about that as well. Are you building an economy? Are you building a culture in which people have access to a chess club? The book I wrote spends a lot of time talking about how you rebuild not just healthy communities, but healthy institutions again. How you allow for people to belong to a church, to a civic club, to a chess club. That's about supply and demand, rebuilding the health of the institutions, but also prioritizing leisure time, again, building an economy where if you work 40 hours a week, you can provide for your family and you can spend the rest of your time engaging in the pursuits of belonging. Belonging, though, can also happen through your work, which is why the design of the economy should prioritize a feeling of power in your work, right? Having an ownership stake in the company, having more people belong to unions, right? There is a structure in which your belonging can happen through work. Not for everybody, but for many people it does. Not today, where work just feels exploitative and extractive to most people. So you design leisure time purposefully, you design the identity of work purposefully, you rebuild the health of local communities, all of a sudden, less people are drifting in the wind. All of a sudden, people have these roots in the ground. And so that's why I was really excited to come talk to you today, because I think your endeavor is the most important. All the fascination and talk is about winning elections and beating Donald Trump and his movement, and that's really important. But if you don't solve the spiritual crisis in this country, if you don't make people feel less lonely and more powerful, it'll just be a matter of time before the next demagogue comes along and gives you a series of scapegoats to blame for your problems. Our mission is enormous. Our mission is to win elections, but also to rebuild the economy and the culture, to reestablish people's roots. And I'll just leave you with this. That can seem overwhelming, right? That dual project of being powerful in your politics, but also doing this hard work that you're engaged in of recentering our economy so that people feel powerful and connected again. But you know what? We're celebrating 250 years of the most extraordinary experiment in societal organization in the history of the world. Right? 250 years ago, our founders said, we are going to build a system of self-governance in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic nation. Now, that was unthinkable at the time. No civilization in the history of the world had done those two things together. Self-governance in a multicultural nation. And they were super purposeful about the way in which they structured the government, but also the ways in which they structured the economy and the culture, and had lots of arguments between themselves about the ways not just to structure the government, but the economy and the culture to make sure that it all hung together. De Tocqueville shows up a couple decades later and worries whether this country of strivers, of individuals, can hang together. And his prescriptions are mostly cultural in terms of the glue that he thinks is necessary for a nation that has decided to do these two things together, democracy and multiculturalism, to survive. And so, yes, the tasks are overwhelming. Win elections and rebuild the culture and the economy so that people feel powerful. But you know what? What a gift. What a gift. You are all here because you have been given gifts in your life. You're in this room because you are in a place in your life by hard work or by grace in which you can contribute to this project of saving the democracy at a moment of peril. You happen to be parachuted into the world, into the United States of America, the greatest experiment in governance and cultural organization in the history of the world, at a moment of peril, at a moment which it's under threat. And you're in this room because you are in a position to do something about it. Hannah Arendt knew that this new country that she had adopted as her own, the United States of America, was really fragile. She spent her life writing about the metaphysical preconditions for the survival of a place like America. And I'm just more convinced than ever before that the work that you are doing to build more powerful, more connected actors in our culture and our economy is literally the stuff that is in the end going to be the story of how this democracy survived for another 250 years. So to Barry and everybody, thank you very much for allowing me to come by and say a few words.